Never happened. Never happened.
I know we might need to not fly through it, but so it's our top 3 most underappreciated games. So we each have a top 3. So I guess it's like a top 6, really. I'm calling it a top 3.
I will say that it's, while we're saying top 3, like for me, it's probably more like 3 of my most, if that makes sense. I kind of wanted to represent different things as part of this list. So
okay, interesting.
Yeah, so we'll get to it.
And so again, we often do this, and it can cause a lot of drama, or not drama, a bit of hilarity at the time. We have not shared like what each other's lists are. So I actually said, "Oh, what happens if we have the same game?" And you said, "No, there's no chance of that." So okay.
Also, very unlikely. It's not.
I think it's not going to happen. The other one is, we had this discussion, before going live around underappreciated versus something like underrated, and it's very much underappreciated. So the way I would think about that is, maybe you could even almost argue something like Control could turn into that, where it rated very highly. It has not sold well. It still hasn't sold well. And who knows, maybe in 10 years' time, if it doesn't have a remake or anything, I'd probably put it in the underappreciated category.
Yeah, and the way I kind of, like in my head, I think of it is that no one really talks about these games. Especially there's definitely one on my list that no one ever talks about, but
okay.
It's just no one really talks about these games. They just don't come up randomly in conversation. They don't come up in many lists that you see on the internet. And, and these could have been, critically rated high or low or medium, whatever. I don't care. Yeah. It's more like I just don't hear people talk about them. I just don't think they get any credit in the general, discussion of gaming, basically.
Yeah. And that's very timely because, like, what I want to talk about, I feel like the games that I've picked, so like I feel like they're all underappreciated and they're just not in the conversations that I think they should be. And I think it's unfair at times. And I think it's sometimes, for me, about convenient narrative for people where they kind of want to skip over it because it doesn't help a neat story that they want to tell about something without sort of having the nuance that is actually there. So, and for me, it's not really actually top 3, like in order, kind of like it's a bit rough. Like I kind of, even when I'm thinking about it now, like, not even sure if it would be in this order that I'm going to present it. But do you want me to open the batting? Swinny?
Yes, I should learn to unmute before I reply. Okay, yes, cool. Kick us off.
All right. So you can't see my screen, but you will be able to see this on YouTube. But I'm going to talk to it anyway. Not number one, I'm just going to say one of my top 3 most underappreciated games is Wolfenstein 3D.
Wow, okay. I'm right. Interested to see where you go with this.
Well, I'll defend this. So, this is obviously dating me. But, I was playing games, and I was a little kid, like, by the way, but I was playing games at the time, and I remember when Wolfenstein 3D came out, and it was available, like back in those days, effectively it was almost like you'd have demos and then you'd turn demos into full games.
Shareware. Love it.
And so, we got this game as shareware, and then I was able to get a copy of it from a store. I think I still have a boxed version of Wolfenstein 3D, like a PC big box version.
I played this game for the very first time at your house on PC, just putting that out.
And then, like, this is how nuts I got about this game. I actually wrote in to id Software in Texas to get the disc version of Spear of Destiny, which was the expansion pack version. And I think I still have those discs.
Now that is probably candid for underappreciated as well, if you count that as a separate thing.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about it now, like, because these were, like, I think that they did it themselves, dude. Like, that they actually
printed the discs and stuff.
Yeah, and wrote on it, like, from memory. That's how I recall it. Like, I wonder how much they're worth now. Like, it's quite a cool piece. I should try to find them. So yeah,
I'd
like,
say
getting back to this
man,
game.
like, I don't know if you're going to mention it, but you were so into that stuff that even when it came to Doom and that, you had like Final Doom and stuff. You had all those things.
Oh
You were
yeah,
full
like
on
I
into
love them,
id
man.
stuff.
Yeah, I loved it. Like that. Even though I love console gaming and everything like that. Like I just love so much PC gaming. I love the fact that it's like so annoying and so hard to deal with and everything like that. There's just something really cool and magical about it. Oh, okay, I'm just looking. Yeah, these do sell for a lot actually. Um, and yeah, so like getting back to Wolfenstein 3D. So I remember like when it came out, I was blown away by this game. This was one of the very first, first person shooter games. And kind of like I would argue that this is really the first person shooter. Like there was Catacombs 3D, there was some other games, but they weren't like structured like a first person shooter. Like in Wolfenstein 3D, to me, why I've put this as one of the most underappreciated games is because when people talk about this era in games and what had happened in games, everyone talks about Doom. And in a lot of ways, rightfully so. But if you actually look at Doom and then look at Wolfenstein 3D, the kind of innovation from like Catacombs 3D and everything else that was out there to Wolfenstein 3D, to me, was more revolutionary than Wolfenstein 3D to Doom.
So,
like in terms of what you could do in Doom, like it was elevation, there was a few other things. The setting was really different, which was cool.
so is it?
But I
It's
love the
almost
setting of Wolf 3D.
it's almost like Demon Souls and Dark Souls. Like Dark Souls is the one where you're like
Dude,
Souls, Dark
correct.
Souls, whereas and that's the Doom of the From Software lineup. Whereas
Yeah, 100%, dude. That's
Demon Souls
such.
should get the credit.
Yeah, and then project forward, like people almost don't even mention Wolfenstein 3D. Like they almost like don't talk about it like it's a real thing or anything. Like it doesn't count for some reason. And then with all the remakes and like the continuation of that series, which I love and so cool that they've done that, it still to me hasn't elevated. It still hasn't like, got the zeitgeist like Wolf 3D. And having played through it, I beat the game. I used to draw the maps, which was a very unfortunate process because id Software were naughty boys. And when I would draw these maps and I would draw the boxes and what they would look like, I'm like, this looks like something that, you shouldn't be drawing. So, because they would love to do that in their maps. They did it quite often.
They didn't have a map in game. They added that in Doom. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. Okay. And yeah, it's just like this game did so much and I just see no love for it. And if you go back and play it now, it's super playable. It's super playable just like the way that Doom is. And yeah, it just doesn't get the love that I think it should get. And I think, some of my titles that I'll talk about like did sell well, but I just think the way they're being remembered is like a bit harsh. So that's me for my first game, Wolfenstein 3D. What is your first game?
So my first game is a very obscure PlayStation 1 title called Crime Killer. And I swear, I reckon, not only do I think you probably don't know about this game,
I've never even heard of it.
Vast majority of people would not know what this game is. Every time I tried to think of this game, for some reason I think of the title Cop Killer, which is a very different thing. First of all, it's a song. Second of all, you are playing as a cop in this game, a future cop.
Okay.
The reason why I think this is underappreciated, so I don't think this is a game that should be considered as a pantheon of a classic PlayStation game or anything. But I remember when I played this game, it blew me away because from a technical standpoint, it's running. So basically, to give some context about the game, sorry, you're a future cop that's basically in like a future cop, car, and you're going around racing around third person or first person, like chasing down drug dealers, completing objectives and stuff. And it's just like a mission based game, but it runs at a silky smooth 60 frames per second on the PlayStation 1. And if you remember, a lot of PlayStation 1 racing games really struggled. Think back even to like the racing, was it Die Hard 3 and Die Hard Trilogy? Obviously anything, Gran Turismo, was a step up, but that's Gran Turismo. This game just felt so smooth. When you're playing, you're like, wow, this does not feel like a PlayStation game in any way. Like, the trade-off is that the visibility is quite short, but I think it's fine because the maps, and it's like, it's when I say a driving game, you're driving around these little open maps. It's not like you're around a course. And you're kind of, doing objectives, chasing down people. But from a technical standpoint, like, no one talks about this game. It was developed by a developer called Pixel Logic. It came out in 1998. It was also on PC. So when I'm talking about Underappreciated, I think I'm talking specifically about it being a PlayStation game. It just did not feel like a PlayStation game. I remember just being like, what is this? Like, very few games ran at 60 frames per second that I can remember in that era. It's kind of similar to the feeling I got when I was playing F-Zero X on the 64, but that's appreciated. No one talks about this game. Like,
yeah, I've never even heard this game. I'm just looking at gameplay footage of it now. It's like, yeah, it does look crazy actually, because it looks like PlayStation graphics, but silky smooth, if that makes sense in terms of the frame rate.
And it actually controls really nicely, which is like goes. So it creates this really smooth experience. And the reason, like, I'm not going to spend too long on this. The reason why I think it's underappreciated, because it was to me, it was a bit of a technical marvel to have this game. But the game itself is I'd say, it's pretty standard. I thought it was fun, but I don't think, as I said, it's going to be considered a classic game or anything. It's got multiplayer. Apparently, it's not that great from what I've heard. I never got to try it. But I'd be interested to see if multiplayer runs 60 frames split screen, or if they drop that down or not. But yeah, I think it deserves to have more appreciation, and that's what this whole feature is. Again, is so obscure, no one talks about it. It was published by Interplay, so maybe that's why. So
yeah, like, I mean, the visibility is like insanely bad, but
it doesn't,
like, it might be the worst that I've ever seen in a driving game.
It doesn't actually matter that much with the way the maps are structured, if you know what I mean. Like, because everything's pretty close. It's not like you're going super top speed on a highway or anything. You're driving around these city streets. But
it does look like a mod or something. Like, that's the thing to me. It looks like someone's modded the game and made it run faster, but kept the shitty graphics, if that makes sense. But that's how the game looked.
I would say it's possible that gameplay, I'm not sure if that's that I linked for our video use, is PC or PlayStation, but I think it's probably PlayStation. But I think it's just something that deserves to, have more appreciation. So yeah, that was my first game.
Nice. All right, well, let's get into my next game. So this is one of my top 3 most underappreciated games, and it's going to be interesting to see what you think of this one. So one of my games is Terranigma.
Yeah.
So
yes.
Terranigma, this is one of the ones that we definitely wanted to talk about at some stage, and I'd like to come back to it eventually. But I guess for context, for me, still the Super Nintendo is my favorite console of all time. I have a analog Super NT. There's just like something that's, I think whenever you look at people and go, what were you playing when you were like 12 to 15? Whatever that was, that's typically what your favorite console of all time, if you ask people. And that was kind of around the hitting zone for me. And this game, I never owned a copy of this game, and I would love to own a copy of this game, but they're just insanely expensive now. But you actually own this game, and you lent it to me.
And I took a chance on this game. I knew not, because like, you just didn't hear anything about this at the time. I remember seeing it in Target, and I'm like, oh, what is this game? It's by Enix. I know Enix made some
Illusion of Gaia, Time.
Yeah, like at the time, like Dragon Quest wasn't really on our radar, so it was more like, oh yeah, Illusion of Time, Illusion of Gaia. Like, I remember playing that on an emulator. I didn't own it. I don't even know if Illusion of Gaia came out in Australia. It probably did, but yeah.
I think it was Illusion of Time over here from memory.
Yeah.
But so like, and I would always follow and pretty religiously read through all the magazines around Nintendo and stuff like that. But it's funny because now in retrospect you find out that like that's all just basically marketing material from Nintendo themselves. And yeah, so it did come out, Illusion of Time in Australia, and it's known as Illusion of Gaia in the States. But this game, like as with you, I knew zero about it. And you had it and you lent it to me, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of like, what the hell is this game? It looks really fascinating. And man, I fell in love with this game so hard. It's, how would you describe it? It's kind of like an action RPG.
Yeah.
Would that be accurate?
Yeah, it's an action RPG. Think Secret of Mana and stuff, but you at no point do you stop and bring open like a menu of spells or anything. So it's all the action part of that.
And it's kind of funny because these games kind of fell out of favor. And then if you actually think about it, a lot of games now that were traditionally RPGs are almost like the forebearers or the, the descendants, sorry, of these games. Like Final Fantasy VII Remake is like an action RPG now in a way,
yep.
right? It's more on the RPG side, but it's kind of almost closer to this game than it has to do with Final Fantasy VI in a weird way.
Yeah, I agree. It's these games, like, Secret of Evermore is a huge one for me as well.
Oh, such a good one, yeah.
Then, you kind of saw... I mean, there were action RPGs on the PlayStation, definitely not on the 64, really. But it was the turn-based ones that were, mainly getting the attention. So until modern times.
Yeah, and then like that was around the time that Square bought out Enix and then became Square Enix and all that kind of stuff. Like a few years after this, and this game, it's just like the vibe of the game, the story. There's a huge twist in this game, and to me, the story lands so well. The tone is very distinct and kind of like suits me because it's like a little bit, not dark, but kind of just like off kilter and a bit, edgy or something. And there's something about that I really like. I feel like this whole game was executed so perfectly. Like the combat, maybe like the leveling system and the way that whole works. Because even though I can recall, you grind a bit and you become so powerful, you just destroy everyone in this game. So that's probably one thing that they would have to fix if they ever remade this game. But, going back to the, underappreciated and quite frankly underrated, this game to me, like I know that it has a bit of buzz, and the context really is that this game never came out in the States. So this game came out in Europe, Australia, and Japan, and has a little bit of a cult following there, but never came out in the States. And it's only through the whole retro movement that people discovered this game. And I always interpreted it that, now people would regard this as like one of the classics. But having looked at it recently, like I actually looked at a top 100 SNES game list, and they were including games that didn't get released in the States. This wasn't even on the list of 100 games for like the SNES in terms of the top 100.
That's insane. That is insane. This is a top 10 SNES game.
It is insane to me. And without getting too controversial, I honestly just put this game on the same level as Legend of Zelda, Final Fantasy VI, the Chrono Trigger, like in that kind of category. Like, and I think I'm kind of running out of games to think of like that would be at that level for me. And the fact that not only is it not, like I'd understand if people said, hey, I think it's a level below that. Okay. But it's not even in the conversation, right? It's like not even on the top 100 lists of people that I see. It's criminal, to be honest. And people are sitting on this game. This is one of the games, though, compared to some of those games I just mentioned, like people could just go back to, and it kind of feels a little bit modern in terms of the story and everything like that. Just given the tone is slightly, ever so slightly more adult. And yeah, like this is a game that people should play, and I love this game so much. And yeah, it's definitely a massively underrated game. Like for me, maybe even my number one underrated game.
And this 100% is one of mine as well. But the reason I didn't touch this is, first of all, I expected you may talk about it, and second of all, is that while this game is underappreciated, when it gets talked about, it gets credit when it's talked about. So
that's true.
Yeah, but one thing I love about this game as well is even the Japanese name, which is I think Tenchi Sozo, means the creation of heaven and earth, which is such like, man, that play this game and you'll see why that's cool. But also just to clarify, so while this is an Enix game, it's actually developed by Quintet. So for anyone that knows Quintet, so they worked on Soul Blazer, so SNES action RPG, Illusion of Gaia, and Time, which we just mentioned. And so this is essentially the third game in that trilogy by Quintet. So really, really cool. Definitely if you played Illusion of Gaia, which definitely is much more known, then you would love Terranigma. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and having played, and they do consider it a trilogy, which is kind of interesting because there's not really strong threads throughout the three games. But for me, this is clearly the best game in the trilogy, and it's also, just for the context, it's the third game they made, which, you know, often if you're on one platform, you know, you learn a lot and things like that. So it's a very strange one to me that this game gets slept on and still hasn't got the regard that it really should have. And it, to me, almost 100% is driven for the fact that they didn't release it in the States as to why it didn't get that following. And it was very late in the cycle, I should say, as well. Like, literally, they had the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64 come out when this game came out. So, you know, that's pretty rough. So that's my second game. What's your second game?
So my second game is a huge favorite of mine. Tomb Raider Anniversary.
Oh, this is interesting. Okay. Well, this is. I'm gonna I'm gonna be seriously interested in how you can argue that this is an underappreciated
This
game.
is definitely underappreciated. Trust me. Trust me. So Tomb Raider Anniversary, for anybody that's not aware of the game, it was released on a bunch of systems. So originally released on PlayStation 2 and PC, came to PlayStation 3 afterwards and Xbox 360, got ported to PSP, got ported to the Wii, and eventually I think also wound up on Mac. Came out originally in 1st of June 2007, so developed by Crystal Dynamics, who's still working on, the game. Well, not the most recent Tomb Raider games, but, worked on the Tomb Raider reboot, and published by Eidos. And Tomb Raider Anniversary is a remake of the very first Tomb Raider game. But technically the 8th game in the series, and I love this game so much. I bought this game. So for anyone who doesn't know, Tomb Raider series has been rebooted twice. So you had the first, I think it's 4 games, and Angel of Darkness. Angel of Darkness killed the Tomb Raider series. It was so bad. They waited years, and then they released Tomb Raider Legend, which was the reboot. And the Legend trilogy, which is Legend, which came out 2006, Anniversary 2007, which I'm talking about now, and Underworld 2008, that trilogy is 3 of my favorite games. I absolutely love that trilogy. I love it way more than the recent reboots, but obviously the recent reboots are popular. They're fantastic games. That Legend trilogy is just it for me. They basically took the mold of not only the classic Tomb Raider games, but think Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, Warrior Within, that kind of really smooth controls, climbing mechanics, environmental puzzles, and then they added that all back into the Tomb Raider series and made that trilogy. And the reason why Anniversary, I think, is super underappreciated is because no one ever talks about that particular game. Like, I very rarely. A lot of people don't even know it exists. It came out so late at the end of the PlayStation's life cycle that by that point, people had been, they were looking at the PS3 onwards. I actually purchased it full price for the PlayStation 2. That's how much I loved Legend. I'm like, Anniversary, just like, I was so pumped for it, and it is so good. It is, to me, the quintessential environmental kind of puzzling game, like Tomb Raider. It's the quintessential Tomb Raider game. I definitely love the first, specifically the first 2 Tomb Raiders, but I mean, they're janky, the controls are tough, especially if you go to it for the first time these days. And these games took, an Anniversary specifically, took these new smooth controls and modern controls and then just added it to the first Tomb Raider and just created one of my absolute favorite games. And what's really weird is, so not only did they release this obviously as a standalone title, but they actually released it as DLC for Legend on the 360 at least as well. So really weird release model. So of course I bought it there as well. Of course.
But wait, didn't Legend come out first?
It did, but they ended up porting it to the 360 as well. And then they made it.
So they ported Legend first to the 360 because that was previously on like the like what the GameCube and the Xbox and all that kind of stuff.
I don't think Legend was on GameCube. I think it was just on PlayStation and Xbox, or at least PlayStation 2. But yeah, it's weird. They basically said, okay, Anniversary, you can either buy it standalone as its own thing, or you can buy it as add-on DLC for Legend. But it was really expensive. We're talking like $30-something per, and it was split in 2 parts. So it was basically the cost of a full retail game, bought as 2 separate packs of DLC, but because they had different achievement lists, and I love, like, when we talk about series I love to complete.
Oh my God. This is where you're nuts.
But I really made it until the most recent reboots added multiplayer and stuff, and my drive for completing them all kind of dropped. I said, I really need to do this, because you had time trials where you had to speed run the levels, and so you learnt the levels, and that's why this game is so good. So for anyone that doesn't know much about it, like, this has some of the most brilliant level design, definitely of any Tomb Raider game. So it took the cool level concepts from the first Tomb Raider, and it made it heaps better with great controls. And yeah, it also has my favorite level in any video game ever. It was one of my favorite levels in the original, which is St. Francis Folly. So it's set in Greece, and basically, after this first big area where you're climbing these big pillars, you enter this huge vertical room. And a lot of people will probably know where I'm getting at if they've played the original Tomb Raider. And that huge vertical room splits off into 4 different areas that are based on Greek mythological figures like Hephaestus and Poseidon and Atlas and Damocles and things like that. But each area has traps and puzzles that are in the theme of those people. So Damocles has swords hanging from the ceiling that will fall down on you. Atlas has this huge globe that you need to run away from. It's just such a cool level, and it's my favorite level ever. And yeah, I love that trilogy so much. And Anniversary, the reason why it gets underappreciated is because, well, a lot of people, honestly, the naming is, like, I think a lot of people get confused between Legend and Anniversary, and then Underworld came out and closed off the trilogy, which I did like, but Anniversary just is always forgotten about. Like, I just never hear anyone talking about it, and the reason why it's underappreciated for me is because I think that game is amazing, and no one talks about it. Or at least they don't talk about it to the same level that I love it, so I think it's really underappreciated. And it also...
Yeah, it's not a bad one, because I hadn't heard of this game. I know that, like, Tomb Raider got rebooted a couple of times, but I think this one's just been squeezed in and then kind of didn't find its own voice. And just looking through, because it got pretty decent reviews, but it's actually the lowest selling game in the entire franchise history.
And it's such a shame, because I've played all of them with the exception of, I haven't played the most recent one, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And it's by far my favorite out of any of the games. And it is so good, and it's like, it is the most Tomb Raider game ever, because other than probably the first one, because it's just all set in tombs and environmental puzzle. There's no like modern things like there's still shooting, but you're shooting against the dinosaurs in the Lost Valley area, or you're climbing in the pyramids in Egypt, and they have the Natla Mine section, which was, I think, additional content they added in later for the original Tomb Raider, and that's part of this as well. Just really cool. It's got the best voice actress for Lara that did the Legend trilogy, and also the Guardian of Light games, those isometric games. So just everything about this game I think is amazing. I'd love if they did a remaster trilogy of these 3 games, but with the way that the modern reboot sells, there's probably no reason for them to do it. It'd just be something that I'd really like. So
yeah, and then especially given that, like, this was the worst selling out of 12 Tomb Raider games, and then Underworld, I don't think is critically regarded, right?
I think it got pretty average to maybe okay reviews. I quite like Underworld, but I definitely prefer Legend and, of course, Anniversary.
Yeah. All right. Not sure if you won me over with that one, but I do think the dynamic of, like, it being the worst selling is quite interesting, and given that it's your favorite game.
But the fact you didn't know it exists, not that you probably know that much about Tomb Raider, it's like, no, when you mention this game, most people just don't know it exists, which is a crime, because it's so good.
And I think it's also, like, with Tomb Raider, because it's kind of gone a bit all over the place. Like, and there's so many games, right? Like, in 25 years that Tomb Raider's been around, is that about right? 25, yeah I think. they've got 12 games, so it's a game every 2 years. That's a huge, that's a lot.
And there's huge breaks in between, like the original set of games and then the Legend trilogy and the recent reboots. But just anyone that loves Prince of Persia: Sands of Time or anything like that, like Tomb Raider Anniversary is fantastic.
Yeah, nice. All right, well, I'll get into my last one. And again, they're not in order, but I think this is the most controversial one. So, well, the last one that I've got in my top 3 of most underappreciated games is Diddy Kong Racing. Now,
God,
this is pretty controversial, this one, because Diddy Kong Racing, I feel like I'm mounting the argument of why I shouldn't include it. Like, from a sales perspective, Diddy Kong Racing is actually, I think, in the top 10 of Nintendo 64 games. And it was received well, like, when it came out. But the challenge for me is that no one really goes back to this game and talks about it. Like, even when I look online to read about this game, there's very little on it compared to, like, other games of that era. And, similar games like Crash Team Racing / Mario Kart. And I think, like, ultimately for me, I think, as a huge Mario Kart fan, I still feel like there's not enough lessons to have been learned from this game and applied to Mario Kart and then just the kart racing genre in general. And now I know that, like, Crash Team has, a story mode and that's core to it, but like, for me, when I played Diddy Kong Racing, like, man, I got into this game so hard. And, I don't know. It's really hard if I was to say, do I think that this is better than any Mario Kart game? But, like, as an overall package, I'd find myself very hard to say that this isn't better than any Mario Kart game overall. Because it just gives you so much. And it's so fun. And then, like, just parking the whole story thing, the game had, hover carts, and then, like, planes as well as part of the dynamics, and, boss levels, even if they're simplistic. And then also the multiplayer game was, like, very diverse compared to pretty stock standard stuff that you had in Mario Kart. And I'm kind of shocked that, like, I hear it every now and then, but I don't know. I just feel like, I do actually feel like there's space for multiple kart games on the Switch. I mean, Crash Team Racing has sold pretty well on the Switch even. And, like, I would love if they rebooted this franchise and, created a new, like, even if it was Donkey Kong Racing. And I know that this has been, like, rumored many times and even worked on, but I still feel like there's a gap there. And whether this could fill it, like a second entry in this series. It's not a series, it's only one game, or if they can take finally the lessons from this game and try to do something a bit different with Mario Kart, which, if I apply a business lens, I don't think they will, because look at it, Mario Kart, they re-released it on the Switch and it's the number 1 selling game on the Switch, selling like 28 million copies. So I unfortunately feel like, my desire will be unheeded, but yeah, like I take this as one of my most underappreciated games.
Yeah, the thing with this though, I love Diddy Kong Racing, of course. You were so, like, that Wizpig battle at the end was so difficult. So I don't know if I ever got the gold TT time or whatever it was that you had to get on that one. But the thing with this is I do, like, whenever people talk about it, they talk about it super fun. But if your argument is that not enough lessons were learnt, so it's underappreciated in terms of its impact on future games in the genre, then yeah, I agree with that, definitely.
I mean, this game came out, and, like, to me, like, and I love that genre, but, like, Mario Kart never evolved. Like, this game to me was like decades ahead of what Mario Kart's done. And, Crash Team Racing, and it's a game that I need to play more, but, yes, there were, like, it was almost like a carbon copy, to be honest. They copied a lot from it from 2 years later, but I just feel like this game was so awesome, and I don't understand why people haven't tried to do more with this.
You kind of saw, it felt like Nintendo were going that direction a little bit more with Mario Kart DS, where they started adding the missions and, there was more to it, and then they went away from that again. So it's like Mario Kart DS felt like it had a lot more content if you're just a person playing by yourself, right? Not just having to rely on, because naturally multiplayer games are more inherently, games that are really focused on it are more inherently replayable. Whereas from a single player standpoint, Mario Kart's always been fairly, like, there's not a lot there once you've unlocked everything. Whereas, Mario Kart DS felt like they were, had more there. And whereas Diddy Kong Racing felt like a single player game that you could also play multiplayer. I agree that I'd love them to do it with Mario Kart, but yeah, I'd also love another Diddy Kong game. Diddy Kong Racing game.
Yeah, or like I would love if they did a mashup or like a Smash style version of Mario Kart and added other races from different genres and then other sort of vehicles. Like I think that was one thing that the cancelled Donkey Kong Racing that was meant to come out to the GameCube. Like they were going to use the animal buddies from Donkey Kong Country as like kind of modes of transport, so that they were going to handle differently and everything like that. I don't know. Like, I'm a huge fan of the kart racer genre. I think I've played every single Mario Kart apart from Double Dash. And when I'm in play, like, get through pretty much 100% the whole thing. And probably Mario Kart DS is my favorite overall. But I don't know. I'd really kind of like, I've never been asked the question, but I'd probably still say that Diddy Kong Racing I prefer over all of them, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I should go back and play it again. But, just like it's such a shame to me that game didn't grow legs and they didn't kind of go on and make further games and didn't try to do more like that game tried to do.
I'd love them to start, and you started to see it with the DLC a bit when they added Link and that for Mario Kart 8. But
in England,
I'd love them to kind of follow the path that Sega Racing All Stars did, where they started to really make it much more of a Smash situation, where the actual karts themselves are like really representative of games where they're from. And by all accounts, I think I've only probably played the demos of them, but the Sega Racing All Stars, like those games are really good as well. So I don't know what the single player content's like in them, if they're kind of closer to Mario Kart than Diddy Kong, I imagine so. But I think there's space for growth in that genre. I really do.
Yeah, this is the last thing I'll say, that to me, I look at it and go, it's a very basic game ultimately, but they're trying to do something different, and people like do love kart racing games. Like you look at the sales of kart racing games, they're crazy for the amount of effort you put in. And if I was a developer, like I'd probably go, hey, how do we make like a really different kart racing game where it has like a lot of story and consequences and stuff you can do? Because the mechanics of playing kart racing games, it's just inherently fun because it's so sloppy and a bit like arcadey. And I just think there's so much to do there and it hasn't been explored. And for me, eventually when they explore this and plumb this kind of genre, I feel like people may then eventually turn back to Diddy Kong Racing and kind of go, wow, they were trying to do that kind of stuff, back in like 97 or whatever it was, versus, like now we're in 2020 and it feels like it hasn't even evolved much since then. So yeah, that's my top three. And then let's get into your last and your other top three underappreciated games.
Yeah, so this is probably my favorite game of these underappreciated. And if there's one thing you notice, I haven't talked about any RPGs in my top three. So of course I have to have an RPG. So my third most underappreciated game is Resonance of Fate. So Resonance of Fate is otherwise known as End of Eternity in Japan, so if anyone knows it by that term. But Resonance of Fate was what it's known in the West. So Resonance of Fate came out on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 originally, and then got ported to as a HD remaster to PlayStation 4 and PC. Not Xbox One, which is a shame, but oh well. So it came out in 2010. Developed by Tri-Ace, who are known for Star Ocean, Valkyrie Profile. They also worked on Final Fantasy 13-2 Infinite Undiscovery, which is not so great, but it was published by Sega for the original release, and then for the HD remaster by Arc System Works. So Resonance of Fate is just so cool. Like, I can't, like, this game, I just wanted, this is the game that I just want to share with everyone. You know, when we talk about underappreciated, this is the one that I just want to be everyone, play this, you know. But the problem with this game is that it's also has one of the biggest learning curves of any game I've ever played. So a lot of what this game the reason why this turned people away is because the combat system, which is my favorite combat system probably in any RPG except for maybe Final Fantasy X, is also super complicated and hard to learn at first. And it makes the game really hard until it clicks with you. But before I get to there, I just want to kind of just set the scene. So it's set in this world called Basel, which is this giant structure, like giant tower, and it's essentially the rest of the world. Apparently, it's like a future Earth or something has like been poisoned by the atmosphere. So this huge tower is like a purification system, and the way it works is to make people immune to it. They link their lives to these stones quartzes, and then but the side effect is everyone has a set social status and a set lifespan. You know, so it's just from a plot standpoint setting, it's really cool. It's like steampunky everywhere. It's basically there's really no grass or trees anywhere. It's pretty much like brick and stone, but it's got this really cool vibe to it. And you play as a mercenary group that does tasks for the citizens of this Basel, or this giant tower. And yeah, it's just from a plot standpoint, I will say it's not the strongest plot, but it's all about the vibe and the gameplay. The gameplay is just crazy. So that battle system I was talking about, not only is it one of my favorite, but it's one of the most unique battle systems I've ever played. I don't think I've played another game like it since. There may have been other games like it that I haven't played, but it's all based on guns and explosives. There's no melee. So you think about a JRPG, it's all guns and explosives, which already is pretty unique. And the way it works is you got SMGs that do scratch damage. So it'll like build up this type of damage, and then handguns will then do direct damage. So you build up the scratch damage, and then you break that scratch damage and cause the real damage with the other type. So what you got to do is you've got to mix up your three characters with different weapon types, and then explosives break off armor and also do direct damage. So it's a really, really cool battle system that's all focused on, it's called Tri-Attack. So it's based on your character's positioning and doing crazy acrobatics in combination with charging up attacks to take out the enemies. And once it clicks with you, it creates the most stylish, awesome battles ever. That's why it's so cool. Like, it's actually probably, when someone's playing it that really knows what they're doing, and it's probably really fun to watch because of how dynamic and crazy the battles get, where you're flipping over bosses behind cover. You know, it's pretty intricate, and it like, even to the point, your position matters so much that you've got to make your character, like, let's say you've got your three characters, the character you're controlling in that turn, you've got to make them run between the other two characters to like get a point. And you've got to keep positioning your characters to the point where then you get enough to like trigger Tri-Attack moves where they all run and do acrobatics at the same time. It's just so cool. But the problem is that it's really complicated. So until you learn, and there is like an arena where it tries to teach it to you, honestly, the real thing I can say against the game is that, you know, it needed better tutorials. But once you learn it, it's so cool. This game is just awesome. And it's one of my other favorite things about it is, so we talk about guns, like the weapons in the game. So weapon customization is so cool in this. So the way it works is you get your gun, you put it on like a blueprint, and then you physically attach all the attachments, like the scopes, the barrels, and everything physically to the guns on the blueprint. But it's hilarious because you can create these crazy monstrosities. If you want to laugh, just look up Resonance of Fate, like weapon blueprint or something, and you'll see some crazy, stupid looking guns that are awesome. But it's so much fun because as soon as you unlock or you craft a new attachment, you just want to go back and start working and customizing your guns. It's really, really cool. And the last thing I'll say about the game is the map and the overworld is really unique. So it's like a hexagon grid system, and you unlock through battles and through quests, you unlock hex pieces. They're almost like Tetris pieces in a way, where it's got like a line of hexes, like 4 hexes in a row, or you've got like a hex that goes around a corner, or like a TP style thing. And then you lay that out to unlock the map and activate nodes and things. And it's really, really cool. I just haven't played anything like it since. And it's got a pretty good in-game stuff and New Game Plus. So there's a lot to keep your attention. I really, really cannot talk enough about Resonance of Fate. And the reason why I think it's underappreciated, because people that love this game love it. It's that it just didn't move the needle when it came out. So I remember when it came out, people were like, oh, this cool new steampunk gun JRPG. And then it just disappeared. So when we talk about games that are kind of lost in the mire, that just don't come up, when you talk about, top, RPGs or, cool RPGs, just it doesn't come up that often. I would say out of all my 3, this is the one that gets the most credit, but I don't think it gets enough credit. So that's why I think it's underappreciated.
I'm looking at the gameplay footage. It does look like really insane.
It's crazy.
Like it looks crazy. Like even a crazier version of Bayonetta or something.
Yeah,
which is saying something.
It's really cool, and the way it works as well is so when you add more barrels to your gun, for instance, it allows you to charge up more of the circles as you're running. So it's not like you running and you mashing the button. You're actually waiting for the charge ups and then let go at the right times. Like, it's actually really challenging, but it's really what's the right term? Like, you get a lot out of it. You feel like you've actually won the battles.
Rewarding or something.
Yeah, rewarding. It's really rewarding.
Yeah,
great
nice. So just to summarize, my top 3 in no order was Wolfenstein 3D, Terranigma, and Diddy Kong Racing. And your top 3 was Crime Killer, Tomb Raider Anniversary, and Resonance of Fate. It was really interesting just to have a deep dive on underappreciated games. And it's always, I don't know about you, but just like looking through and thinking through it as well. It's interesting how some games have changed in opinion, in terms of they kind of almost have become, okay, that is recognized and loved, versus I think all of these games probably don't get the amount of love that they deserve.